And today we're going to talk about chapters February to April, because we know that, in the Wednesday Wars, which we're going to talk about, the chapters are in months, right? Not numbers. So we're going to start with February. Keep on, okay? So I wanted to ask you, if you had been Holling's father and you are going to you're preparing for a presentation because you want to be the Chamber of Commerce Businessman of 1967 award, how would you have felt, and how would you have acted to other people? Like, would you have been impatient to other people, or would you have been happy and smiley to other people because you never have any pressure? And some people don't feel a lot of pressure. At other times, some people do feel pressure. And also, I wanted to ask you, do you think that Holling's sister, do you think that she has the right to treat Holling that badly? Because Holling did save his sister's life. And I also wanted to ask you, if you had been, and you can just pick any member of Holling's family, Holling's dad, Holling's sister, Holling, or Holling's mother, and how do you think they felt when, the plaster, right, like, plastering, like, and the newly plastered, like, ceiling was, like, falling, how would you have, felt, and what would you have done? And, okay, now I also wanted to ask you, do you think that, now we're going to go back to the Camilo Junior High, okay? And so, do you think that, the bulging ceiling tiles, what did you think of them? And do you think that they were going to break or not? And also, I wanted to ask you about Romeo and Juliet. So what I wanted to ask you about this was, if you've read any of Shakespeare's plays, okay, and if you've read Romeo and Juliet, how did you like it? If you haven't read any, then that's okay. I haven't read any Shakespeare, truthfully, but I am working on it. Okay, so I wanted to ask you, do you think what did you think of the story? Because Holling said that the story was stupid. Do you agree with Holling that the story was very stupid and not a very good written, story? But Mrs. Baker asked, and I'm gonna read from the book. She said this: "Didn't you find it tragic and beautiful and lovely?" If you ever read Romeo and Juliet, or if you have read Romeo and Juliet, how would you describe it? Stupid or tragic, beautiful, and lovely? And just from the description, but of course this is Holling's point of view, not mine. So, but based on Holling's point of view, I can sort of get why Holling would think that the poem was so stupid. Okay. Now I wanted to ask you, do you like tragedy, or do you like beautiful and lovely? And do you think that a story could be tragic, beautifully, and lovely, all of them at the same time, or not? I think so. It could be possible. There's like a tragedy, And then the beautiful part is, getting together, and maybe the lovely part is, the ending where the tragedy gets solved or something like that. But then again, sorry if I did not read this book. So anyway, I wanted to ask you about Meryl Lee and Holling. Were you surprised that Holling asked Meryl Lee to go out to Valentine's Day? And if so, how does this remind you of Romeo and Juliet? And I know there's a tragic part, and then there's also the beautiful part, and then also there's a lovely part. I know that, right? I mean, you know that, right? Because it shows here in the book. But I really wanted to ask you, in some other ways, how is this sort of like Romeo and Juliet? I think that one way is it's sort of like Romeo and Juliet. Maybe it's because, Meryl Lee, they're both their parents. Their dads run. There's Kowalski and Associates and Hutton and Associates, right? Both of them works in the same industry, right? The same industry, but they work in different companies. So I think that is maybe something like that, right? And okay, I wanted to ask you, do you think that Holling is a cheapskate or not? And were you surprised that Danny Hupfer was going out with Mai Thi? Okay. And I also wanted to ask you about Holling's father's, design for the junior high or middle school. Both work. I prefer to use the term middle school, but junior high school also works. But anyway, I wanted to ask you, do you like modern things or do you like classical things? And we'll know later that, we'll get to that later, okay? And also, I wanted to ask you about, so on Valentine's Day, right? Mrs. Biggio had these cupcakes, right? And what I wanted to ask you about this was not because of the cupcakes, which I'm pretty sure were lovely, but about the tickets to Romeo and Juliet, right? If you had been Holling and Mrs. Biggio give you that, how would you have, what would you have done for her? Or would you have just done nothing for her? How would you have felt? And please use a simile and a metaphor to describe how Holling felt. And optional, you can use an adjective. And also, I wanted to ask you, all I know, what did you think about Holling's date with Meryl Lee? And now there's classical. We learned that Meryl Lee's dad, Mr. Kowalski, he likes classical, right? Classical things. So now I wanted to ask you, do you think that modern is better, or do you think that classical is better? Or do you think there should be a little of both? Personally, it's only my opinion. Okay, I actually can't really choose, but I think that I would like maybe some classical thingies, I like classical, yeah. But then again, that's my opinion. You might have different opinions. So, okay, all in all, Valentine's Day was a pretty good day, right? And now we're going to okay, so now the meeting, right? There was a meeting, and it's this. Mr. Kowalski, he had this modern slash, classical idea, right? And where do you think that Mr. Kowalski got the idea of, everything like this, the modern and classical? Right? And if you have been Holling's dad, describe how Holling's dad felt in 2 metaphors and 1 simile. And and also, if you have been hauling and you realize this, how would you have felt? Please use a metaphor. And how would you have reacted? Would you have stayed quiet, or would you have just called out and said that was cheating? Okay. Now, I wanted to ask you about February. Do you think that February is very good month for love? And I also wanted to ask you, were you surprised that Meryl Lee was sort of like a traitor to Holling, or did you think that maybe Meryl Lee's dad forced Meryl Lee to give the drawing, or maybe Meryl Lee didn't think about it and just gave it to his dad? And I wanted to ask you about the essay, okay? The essay that Holling wrote for Romeo and Juliet. Even if we only read the front sentence and the last sentence, would you agree with Holling on this? And how would you have wrote the essay differently? And I know that you haven't read the book, but if you ever do get to read that play, a book or play, I just keep on getting mixed up because I read a lot of books, but I haven't read any plays. But anyway, if you do want to, have ever read that, then it would be pretty cool if you actually wrote an essay about it. And I also wanted to ask you about Holling's treatment to Meryl Lee. Do you think that Meryl Lee deserved this treatment from Holling or not? And then suddenly, Holling suddenly thought about it and changed his essay, right? And this new essay, what do you think is different about this essay? And how do you think that it's better improved than the last essay? Finally, I wanted to ask you, how do you think that Meryl Lee felt about everything that had happened? Because we're looking at things from Holling's point of view, but let's go to Meryl Lee's point of view. How do you think that she felt about all this? And I really want, and a really curious thing is, if you had to ask Meryl Lee a question, any question, then how do you think that she would answer? And even though and if anybody's reading the book with you, you can ask that person, or maybe you could just ask yourself. Okay, now I wanted to ask you, Holling came to sort of, make up. And do you think that, this making up, how do you think that this was a very okay, how should I say it? Okay, what I wanted to really ask you was, do you think that this part of the story was the best part of February? Yes, so far. And anyway, I also wanted to ask you, about how Kowalski and Associates drew back his bid. How did you feel about this? Did you feel sorry for Meryl Lee because it was her dad's company after all? And then we see that there was also this, Mrs. Baker got a telegram, and when she read it, she was like rushing out of the classroom, and it said this: downed helicopter transport, stop. Really sorry. I really cannot pronounce these. Stop. LTT Baker missing in action. Stop. And all the stops are, a telegram has these stops, sort of like periods, which I guess would be very, very confusing if somebody says stop. If actually someone said like stop, then people would think stop. Oh, that might be a period. So that would be pretty confusing, but all in all, yeah, it's a pretty good way. Okay, but anyway, March. So we're going to March. And I wanted to ask you, if you had been Mrs. Baker and you found this out, how would you have felt? I wanted you to add, what about a metaphor and a simile? And how would you have reacted? Now reacted, really, how would you have reacted, and how would you, okay, sorry. And if you had met Mrs. Baker, there was one technique. And if you were going to share one technique on how to relax, then which technique would you do? It might be your technique, or it might be something that you read online or in a book, okay? And or it might be something that you heard of. And when you see the news of war, how do you feel when you see all these soldiers trapped and people are dying and it's on the news? How do you feel? And even if you've never lived through wartime, how do you think that they felt? Holling and his father and his whole family, right? And really, I wanted to ask you, how do you think that war affects a life? And especially a child's life. If a kid is growing up during war, how do you think that affects the kid or the children, etc.? Okay, but anyway, I also wanted to ask you, so they were reading Julius Caesar, right? Not they, sorry, Holling. And suddenly, and then finally, when he was reading, right? Mr. Venlery, right? He came up with a mallet, and now, things dropped, right? Because things dropped from the ceiling when you removed it, right? And if you had been Holling and you had all this on you, how would you have felt? And really, anyway, there was nothing, right? So they replaced it and they began to read Julius Caesar. But how would you have felt if your teacher with the red pen, I always think of like a red pen, and the red, even though it's just red marker, it's sort of like blood, and bad means blood. Sorry if that got any gory pictures into your mind, but anyway, yeah, but okay, now I also wanted to ask you, there's this saying, right, and it says, beware the Ides of March. And I also wanted to ask you, do you think that what do you think will happen in March that will be bad for them? And also, I wanted to ask you, if you had to go to would you have joined the track team or not if you had been Holling, or would you have not? And do you like track? Curious question. Okay. And how do you like Coach Catrini's attitude to the people who are running? If you had been the people who are running, how would you have liked it? Okay, but anyway, I wanted to ask you, do you think that Bobby Kennedy will ever become president? And actually, Bobby Kennedy, there was JF Kennedy. Right, JF Kennedy, John F. Kennedy. But anyway, Bobby Kennedy was never president, so yeah. But anyway, yeah, he was never president, but here they think that they will be president, right? And do you think that Bobby Kennedy would be a better ruler than, who was it? Who was the other president in the book? Sorry, I just forgot, right? But anyway, I also wanted to ask you about this. So, his father, right? Holling's father told Holling's sister that she was going to work as a, as a receptionist. If you had been Holling's sister, would you have wanted to work as a receptionist or not? And why or why not? Okay, and so I also wanted to ask you about, anyway, what I wanted to ask you about was, Mrs. Baker, right? And Mrs. Baker, were you surprised about how she was running? Or did you know that Mrs. Baker was going to have a few things up her sleeve? And anyway, I also wanted to ask you, Holling had some tips for her, right? When these people came, people came to check on the classroom. And Mrs. Baker said she never rolled her eyes. Yeah, no, that's not true, right? And also, I also wanted to ask you about, what did you think about Holling's advice anyway? Did you like them or not? And were you surprised when you saw that Mrs. Baker had like this medal? And do you think that Mrs. Baker has a lot going on in life? Just that's not just only about being a teacher? And do you think that just you see somebody, right? And you only think that, let's say that you see this receptionist, okay? Okay, what about Holling's sister? What about you are a customer for Hooded Associates and you go into the store and you see Holling's sister and you're like, oh, receptionist. But you don't really know anything about her and you don't know that she actually has lots of background. We just never think about that, but we know because we're the readers that she is a flower child or somebody who wants peace. Either way will work. And she's got a lot going in life. And anyway, how do you like the Ides of March? What did you think about the Ides of March? But anyway, so I also wanted to ask you about the do you think that when Holling recites Shakespeare, how do you think that the teachers thought of this student? Because not a lot of kids have actually read Shakespeare, And then soon, I also wanted to ask you, they were like the America's model classroom, right? Do you agree with that, right? And then suddenly, Sycorax and Caliban plummeted onto Mrs. Sidman's lap, right? And what did you think about this phenomenon? And so, I also wanted to ask you about, did you think that this was a very humorous thing, or do you think that this was not a very humorous thing and this was a very serious thing? But I can't help but laugh, because it's so funny. But anyway, Mrs. Sidman, right? She's like triumphantly, she's like, I got them. Do you think that if you had been Mrs. Sidman, how would you have reacted? And would you have been like Mrs. Sidman acted, or would you have freaked out and fainted? How would I have freaked out and fainted? Well, maybe not that, but I would freak out. I would scream, but I would not faint. And I will probably do the same thing as Mrs. Sidman, except I will be a lot more panicky. That's all. And because I'm pretty good at animals, so I have a lot of experience with animals. I got a pet fish. His name's Lucky. He's a betta fish, or he's actually a Siamese fighting fish, but you can also call him a betta fish. Some people call him betta fish. I prefer to call him betta fish. But anyway, he's actually right over there, and he's pretty cute. I'm gonna after I record this, I'm gonna have to feed him. Okay, but anyway, so do you think Coach Katrini said that there was a big M, and the M was motivation? Do you think that Coach Katrini really helped in the motivational part? Do you think that he was giving any motivation to his track team? No, not really, right? But anyway, so he was running, right? He was like really running, and then suddenly there was this Sycorax and Caliban were chasing him, right? And he was like running as fast as he could, right? And what did you think about this? And also, I also wanted to ask you, you know how Sycorax and Caliban were run over. Do you think that this was a sad moment in the story, even if, even if they were horrible monsters? Or do you think that it was a beautiful day? Okay, now we see that 7th grader, he was like so fast because he was scared. Have you ever, when you're scared, have you ever had like strength? I have. One time, I done something I could never have done before. I was reading and I'm reading books on my couch, okay? And then suddenly, I thought I had seen like a gigantic spider like this big, okay? And I freaked out. And here's the thing, I literally like jumped into the air like 2 inches or something. I was like, not like that. It was more, my whole body went. Now I can't do it. I can't do it. But when I was so scared, I actually did it. I'm gonna try one more time. I can't do it. See? But when I was scared, I did it. So I can relate to hauling. Anyway, I wanted to ask you about the treatment to my fee. Do you think that this is fair or not? How would you describe this behavior? Yeah, I think that I would describe it as racist. And if you had been my fee, how would you have felt? Metaphor, simile, okay? And how would you have reacted? Would you have protested, or would you have been quiet? Or would you have just ignored it and be normal? But anyway, Mr. and Mrs. Hupfer were really proud that Danny stood up to my fee, right? Do you think that Danny deserved this when he had gotten suspension? We all need to think about it both ways, remember? But I think that he does deserve it. And anyway, Lyndon Baines Johnson, right? President Lyndon Baines Johnson. Do you think that Danny really met President Johnson or not? I don't think so. But anyway, when they got back from recess, Mrs. Biggio and Mrs. Baker were holding fried bananas, right? In crushed nuts, dipped with coconut, and topped with caramel sauce. If you had seen that, how would you have felt? And we see that Vietnam isn't just war, right? Vietnam is also a great place. And also Mrs. Biggio and my fee, they make up, and Mrs. Biggio says, Biggio, sorry. And she says, I'm so sorry, my fee. I am so sorry, right? And anyway, so I wanted to ask you, do you think that in Camilo Junior High, how would you describe the difference between Kessna, Vietnam, and Camilo Junior High? How would you describe the difference? And what did you think about a song, right? A song about bananas. And did you think that in this moment, how should I describe this? Okay, so what about this? So far in the book, what was the most happiest, not your favorite, happiest moment you can think of? My opinion is this. Okay, April, okay, which is our last chapter, but April, people, is a pretty long chapter. If people are groaning, then I'm very sorry about that. It's only this long, okay, so we can get through it pretty quickly. I never want Wednesday Wars to end. One of my all-time favorite books. Gary D. Schmidt, genius. All authors are geniuses. Gary D. Schmidt is a genius, really. He's also made OK for Now, a companion book. This OK for Now comes after the Wednesday Wars, but you can read them in any order. It doesn't matter, because even though they come after the Wednesday Wars, they're still narrated by completely 2 different characters different characters, but the okay for now is actually about Doug Swiatek, which is in this book, right? So, but I'm not gonna spoil anything, but anyway, it's about his story, and it just comes after. There's only like one detail that comes after this, but either way, you're perfectly fine. Okay, April, and so I wanted to ask you, do you think that Howling going that fast, do you think that it had a little to do with it, the side corrects in Caliban, do you think that it had a little to do with it or not? And do you think that it was fair that, that everybody threw wads of notebook paper from their books or not? And also, I wanted to ask you about Mrs. Guarchi. I don't know why. Today my tongue is very twisted. I'm terrible at tongue twisters, but today my tongue is just twisted more than normal, okay? And Mrs. Sidman was now the principal. Why do you think that they chose her as the principal? And do you think that the former president, right, Mr. G, I'll just call him G, Mr. G, what do you think that he's going to do next? Do you think that he'll succeed in his dream to become a dictator of a country or not? Okay, but now I wanted to ask you about Mrs. Sidman. How do you think that she is different from Mr. G? And also, I also wanted to ask you about, do you think, all in all, I wanted to ask you, how Marilee is going to move? All in all, that's pretty sad, right? So, how did you just feel at this moment? And do you think that, all that's happened, do you think that's that the character that's facing this, do you think that the character really deserves this or not? Okay, I also wanted to ask you, do you think that Howling should be in the back just because he pulled down his pants, or do you think that Howling should just run extra fast and beat them all? And this is, and also, I wanted to ask you, do you think that, Marilee, do you think that the relationship between Howling and Marilee, do you think that this is shaky or not? I just wanted to ask you, that's all. And anyway, I wanted to ask you about the shooting of Martin Luther King Jr. If you had been the people who had witnessed this, how would you have felt, and how would you have reacted? This could be protesting, maybe killing the people who killed Martin Luther King Jr. Maybe that's a little too far, but then again, Martin Luther King Jr. was very important. Anything, okay? So you can choose on that. And now there's opening day, right? And so he wrote this note and his father just signed it, right? And were you happy about this or not? And if you have been Howling, and even if you weren't Howling, how do you think that he felt about all this, okay? And then at 12:11, his father was not here, right? And his father was actually at a meeting and he was not going to go to a baseball game. If you had been Howling, do you think that you would have ever forgive your father again? And all in all, would you have liked Howling's father as your father? And if you had to describe his father with one word, how would you have done it? I think that I would have chose crummy. He's a pretty crummy father, you know? But anyway, I wanted to ask you, so Mrs. Baker is going to drive Howling to the game. Were you surprised about it? And if you have been Howling, how would you have felt about this? And do you think that Mrs. Baker still hates Howling's guts or not? And do you think that she hated Howling's guts in the first place? Now that we looked at, Mrs. Baker is a very kind person. Okay, but anyway, suddenly Joe Pepitone and Horace Clark came and was like, hey, Danny, Holling, Doug, if these baseball players had called you like that, how would you have felt? And really, do you think that this is the happiest part of the book or not? And now, so they began to play, right? And seriously, this would been amazing. And we see that Mrs. Baker stayed to meet the boss because she, with the baseball bat, she's a pretty impressive woman, right? And I wanted to ask you about if you had gone to school and everybody was paying attention to you, how would you have felt, right? And how do you like spring break? I love it. I love all the breaks. Like when break starts, I begin to celebrate. I have a party, we get some cake. Well, I get a cupcake, not a real cake, but cupcakes are pretty good. I love them. I love them almost as much as cakes. And then I have also movies and we're like, whoo-hoo. I don't dance, but then again, I'm so happy I might dance, but I'm a pretty terrible dancer. So, yeah. But anyway, I also wanted to ask you about, do you think that, Holling's sister wanted to go to college, right? Not going to college? If you had been Holling's sister, college is a really important part of life. I'm not saying that people who do not go to college are not uneducated or anything, but college is an important part of life. And if you were told that you weren't going to go to college, how would you have felt about all this? And okay, now I wanted to ask you about about the race, okay? And what I wanted to ask you about the race was, all in all, when Danny, was hurt, what did you think about everything? And did you think that there was any hope or not? And then he ran, right? And so he ran, but then there were all these 8th graders, so he began going back. And then Mrs. Baker said, "Pass those boys," and suddenly he ran, right? And what I wanted to ask you was, how do you think that those words affected Holling? And do you think that when he won, right, and Marilee and he kissed, right? How do you think? Excuse me. Oh, okay. How do you think that Holling's life was happy, right? And how do you think that Holling felt? Metaphor, adjective. One metaphor, one adjective. And also, how do you think that Coach Katrini also felt? And now we're finished. Happy note. And we're going to go and leave on a happy note. Few questions. If you know me, then you're gonna roll your eyes. But anyway, in these chapters, because all in all, what's your favorite character? They all change. Like you might like this character, and then you're like, oh, I don't like that guy. He's a traitor, and you like another character, right? So what's your favorite character? Least favorite character? Same again. Same as go to the last definition about how your liking changes, okay? And favorite part in these chapters, and then the whole book so far, because favorite parts might change, right? In these chapters, and then the whole book so far, you might like these chapters' favorite parts or other chapters, right? And also, how do you like the book so far? Really fun to measure how you like the book so far. And finally, what do you predict is going to happen next to Holling in May and June, which is our last chapters? Wait, is it May and June the last chapters? I forgot to check. Yes, June is the last chapter. And then we're gonna finish this amazing book. I just really hope that you really enjoyed this reading and being with me. I really, truly enjoyed it. So keep reading, my motto, okay guys? And have a great rest of your day, or if it's night, then have a great rest of your night, guys.